Teacher Julius did not waste any time and published the exploration report in open access. He also shared the news about the groundbreaking new research paper with his fellow colleagues in the academic circles. As a result, it gained traction quite swiftly. Its veracity also did not come under too much scrutiny, considering the reputation of the man who published it. Countless people in the waking world were reading the exploration report on everything on the network, while those in the dream realm fought to get their hands on a printed copy. Some even copied it by hand, and these handwritten copies then changed hands as they were lent and borrowed from friends and acquaintances. The result was explosive. In a short while, the many mysteries revealed by nobody were all that people talked about. And it was no surprise, after all, nobody had gone and revealed the greatest secrets of the world in one fell swoop. It was no different from receiving divine scripture from a messenger from the gods. From how the world had been created to how it ended, from what forces governed all of existence to why the nightmare spell existed. There were these great revelations, and countless smaller ones, as well, things that some people here and there knew, but had never been systematically explained and placed into a coherent framework. Like which powers of the awakened came from the awakening itself and which ones were gifted to them by the spell, why nightmare creatures burned with a demented determination to destroy anything untouched by the corruption, what the shadow realm and the afterlife were, and so on. The mere fact that a thorough explanation of what happened to human souls after death did not make the front pages was insane. But it did not, the exploration report on everything was simply too astonishing. It was indeed a clear and concise explanation of everything. For a few weeks, the world has gone completely mad about the mysteries solved by nobody. Countless gatherings and televised discussion panels took place, with attendance and viewership breaking records. It was comparable, and at times more sought after, than the fateful speech made by Changing Star. These conversations were carried into the private lives of everyone, as well. Everyone was talking about nobody and their report, at the dinner table, while drinking with buddies at the bar, and even while sparring on a training field. The publication of the exploration report caused an explosion in scientific research, as well. After all, countless academics who had been stuck in their own research gained priceless new information and a broader context that allowed them to make instant breakthroughs. Others were passionately expanding on the themes and topics touched upon in the exploration report. There were already several additional, startling discoveries made, and new ones were coming out every day. One mystery the exploration report on everything did not solve, however, was the identity of its author. Nobody knew who nobody was. But everyone wanted to find out. The discoveries made by this anonymous individual seemed too great and groundbreaking for a single person to make. And yet, all signs pointed to the fact that nobody was, indeed, a single person, a fact that was almost as astonishing as the contents of their report themselves. Speculations were abundant, and rumors about nobody quickly went from simply far-fetched to completely ridiculous. Some said that nobody was Changing Star herself, some pointed to Song of the Fallen, some believed that nobody was the ghost of a long-dead champion of the first generation, and some even insisted that nobody was none other than the unknown himself. And that was before people even learned that there was a secret version of the exploration report that only those who passed a mysterious trial could gain. When that piece of information was revealed, for a short while, it seemed as if the whole world became obsessed with searching for nobody. Sunny was observing all that in a dazed state. The stir caused by his academic swan song had gone far beyond his already outrageous expectations. But that wasn't even the reason for his bewilderment. No, but... He looked at the daily newspapers published in Bastion. All of them were full of articles and ridiculous insinuations about who nobody was. What the actual hell? How come? How come every persona he created for the sake of anonymity ended up being more famous than he was? First mongrel, and now nobody. Was he doing anonymity wrong? Shaking his head, Sunny put the newspapers away. Crap. Now I'll actually have to come up with that trial. He had sort of assumed that there would be plenty of time to set something up, but that prediction was proving to be woefully incorrect. Well, it was not too troublesome. Sunny already had experience creating secret trials. The Shadow Clan recruited new members through a similar process. So, he could simply come up with the main points and push it off on Aiko. Taking a deep breath, he looked down at the sprawling vista of Bastion. His bewilderment slowly gave way to a wistful mood. I wonder. The exploration report on everything was merely a small project he poured his mind into in his free time, albeit it was also the culmination of his decade-long pursuit of the truth, and of all the dreadful trials he had survived. Despite that, Sunny had a strange feeling that even if he became sacred, or even divine, this would be the achievement most people would remember him by. Something that would be taught in schools hundreds of years later and become the foundation of common knowledge, and therefore known to everyone, everywhere. So, it was more than a little bit ironic that nobody knew who nobody actually was. That nobody was a man named Sunless. But maybe it was better that way. A particular sentence suddenly came to his mind. Sunny looked to the sky and exhaled slowly. No one knew where Weaver went and what they did. Chuckling quietly, he turned around and went about his business. As if nothing had happened. The exploration report on everything had certainly caused quite a stir. Sunny had expected that he would be dealing with the consequences for quite some time, but who would have thought that something else was going to steal the spotlight in a matter of weeks? Riding across the barren expanse of the eastern quadrant, Sunny looked at the sky and let out a wistful sigh. Mordred was a supreme now, which meant that from the point of view of the public, he was the second sovereign of humanity. The news would spread among the population soon, and it was bound to take at least some of the attention away from the exploration report. After all, most people were more interested in the happenings of today than they were in ancient history. Come to think of it. Sunny's sigh was followed by a quiet groan. The King of Nothing. With a title like that, as well as the timing of his ascent to the throne of supremacy, Mordred was bound to be mistaken for nobody, wasn't he? Sunny remained silent for a while, swaying in the saddle. Then, he let a chuckle and said with a hint of vindictive amusement in his voice. Good, good. Let him draw the fire away for me. Honestly, the idea of Mordred becoming the protagonist of countless ridiculous rumors and having his name dragged through the mud by unscrupulous gossip columnists was kind of appealing. The best part, though, was that the bastard would have no idea how he had ended up in that situation, and who was to blame. Imagining Mordred's expression when crowds of misguided fools kept accosting him improved Sunny's mood a lot. Wouldn't it be fun, him attaining supremacy only to find out that all people want to talk to him about is a research paper written by someone else? Knowing Mordred, that would certainly throw him for a loop. Not only because people would keep seeking him out for strange reasons, but also because he had no idea who nobody truly was either. Sunny let out a wicked laugh. Hearing it, Nightmare looked back and stared at him for a moment, then turned away and let out an absolutely terrifying, chilling neigh. It seemed like he was expressing solidarity, or simply did not wish to be left out. Sunny smiled. Right? You make a good point, buddy. Sadly, his horse was not the best conversation partner, so they continued their journey in silence. And speaking of silence and bad conversation partners, Sunny's thoughts turned to a different event that had happened soon after he regained his senses. Oh, yes. There was that, as well. He thought back to a particular day on the Forgotten Shore. Week. Well, this is interesting. A few days after regaining consciousness, Sunny found himself in the underground hall of the Nameless Temple, far away from the bustling streets of Bastion. Granted, the streets of the Dark City were bustling, as well. Having been absent for a couple of weeks, he was behind schedule on the reconstruction efforts, so thousands of his shades were currently hard at work. He was using the simple tasks of preparing the Dark City for potential settlers to get accustomed to how vast his mind had become due to mind weave. Before, Sunny could only issue simple commands to his shades. If he wanted something more intricate to be done, he had to actively observe and instruct them. Needless to say, that slowed the work down. But now, Sunny could observe and instruct countless shades at the same time. So, the pace with which they were cleaning up the Dark City had increased tremendously. From the simple tasks like clearing the collapsed and unstable buildings to sorting out the rubble and recovering stones that could be used for constructing new ones, from digging pits to lay foundations to laying bricks, He could give thousands of commands at the same time and monitor how the shades performed to correct most mistakes before they happened. It was dizzying, wondrous, and most of all, far more efficient. I'll be able to move on to battle testing soon. The burnt forest awaited. Before that, however, Sunny looked around the vast expanse of the dark hall. Eventually, his gaze settled on the two others who were currently in the nameless temple with him. There were two taciturn beauties standing some distance away, far apart, staring at each other. They were Saint and Slayer, of course. Sunny could not really say that their gazes were heated. After all, Saint was always aloof and indifferent, while Slayer cast her dark gazes at all living beings as if they were prey, but there was definitely some kind of strange atmosphere in the air. Sunny considered it for a few moments, then turned his thoughts back to what he had been contemplating before. Slayer had spent a long time evolving in the dark flames of his soul after killing and consuming the shadow of condemnation. Her evolution only concluded during his venture into the Palace of Imagination. Saint, meanwhile, just finished hers today. They were both supreme now. And that was not all. Although Saint did not quite become a tyrant, some of her attributes have evolved, and she gained a frightening new ability. Slayer, meanwhile, after learning the name of the woman whose shadow she had been from Sunny, she showed a subtle, but poignant reaction. Her gaze grew distant for a short while, and then returned to its usual feral darkness. But something about her was slightly different now. There was a difference that was unseen and hard to define with words. However, there was also a difference that was quite apparent. Slayer seemed to have regained her aspect, or a shadow of her aspect, at least. I am still trying to wrap my head around the implications of her abilities, of her transformation ability, most of all. Shaking his head, Sunny turned to the Onyx Saint. No, not anymore. He turned to the Jade Saint. No matter how I look at it, it's weird. It wasn't supposed to be, but it unmistakably was. Saint's fearsome armor was still as black as the lightless expanse of the underworld, but underneath it, her smooth stone-like skin had become flawlessly white, like sublime jade. And although Sunny knew that it was not unreasonable, he just could not get used to the idea of it. Her skin had been gray as the stone saint and alabaster white as the marble saint, but she had been the onyx saint for so long that he grew accustomed to it. The jade nature of her supreme body was not the only different thing about Saint's appearance, though. She had returned to her usual height now, but immediately after completing her evolution, Saint was at least 10 meters tall, towering above him like a stunning monument. He had a suspicion that even that was not the limit of how tall Saint could become as long as she wished to. She had gained the ability to change her size and mass at will after absorbing the essence of one of Mordred's reflections. Now, Sunny knew that Saint could achieve that by using the negative quality of nothing. And since she had absorbed far more nothing in the Palace of Imagination, there was no telling what her true height was now. It was a far cry from the small living sculpture he found on the forgotten shore, who had been the same height as he was. For what it was worth, though, Saint herself seemed to prefer her usual height, which was just above Sunny. She can weigh as much as a mountain of jade, though. Quite literally, that would, without a doubt, come in handy in battle. What am I even thinking about? The changes brought about by Saint's evolution went deeper than her appearance, of course. Sunny summoned her runes, which had already been adjusted with Cassie's help to reflect the current state of Saint. They read: Shadow, Jade Saint. Shadow rank, Supreme. Shadow class, Devil. Shadow attributes, War Master, Stalwart, Flame of Divinity, Heart of Darkness, Vessel of Nothing. 2 of Saint's attributes had evolved, and a new one seemed to have appeared. The Flame of Divinity was the simplest. Saint had possessed a spark of it even as an awakened. Now that she was supreme, that spark had grown into a towering flame. War Master, however, was more interesting. It was an evolution of the Battle Master attribute, and from what Cassie could glean, the change was quite intriguing. The description of the Battle Master attribute read: Born on the battlefield, the Stone Saint is proficient in all forms of combat. However, the description of the War Master attribute was different. Sunny looked to the runes. War Master attribute description, a veteran of numerous battlefields, the Jade Saint is proficient in all forms of warfare. He was not sure what exactly it meant, however, if he was to hazard a guess, the War Master had to do with strategy and tactics as opposed to personal combat skill. It was an attribute fit for a general, not merely a foot soldier. Which was quite good news, considering that Sunny happened to be in possession of a legion that needed someone to command it. We'll have to see about it in the burned forest. And then, there was the new attribute, Vessel of Nothing. Sunny looked at the runes. Vessel of Nothing, attribute description, nothing dwells in this shadow's body, granting her the power of annulment. It was quite a mysterious description, no doubt. Of course, Sunny had already known what it meant, that Saint had gained a measure of control over nothing, which allowed her to contain it within herself and make use of it to pursue her goals. How exactly the ghostly mist could be used, though, apart from her ability to reduce her size and mass, the answer lay in the new ability she now possessed. Sunny glanced at Saint, who was still staring at Slayer with indifference, and then turned back to the runes. Shadow abilities, Weapon Sage, Underworld Armament, Mantle of Darkness, Blade of Darkness, Shield of Nothing. Shield of Nothing. Sunny concentrated on the new ability and read its description. Shield of Nothing, ability description, nothing protects this shadow, and as long as it does, no one can harm her. These words were both vague and provocative. The reality of what Shield of Denial did, however, was both less grand than what the description implied, and far more fearsome. The Shield of Denial was not a literal shield. Rather, it was a power that Saint wielded now, a field of annulment. And what that field did was deny everyone their own powers when they faced her in combat. As long as Saint sustained the Shield of Annulment, the aspects of awakened and the unholy powers of the nightmare creatures, as well as their attributes, the very things that made them extraordinary, would either be heavily suppressed or outright negated around her. It was a bit like what Moonveil could achieve as long as she made her target bleed. It was also a bit like the foundation the War Realm had been built upon. Needless to say, it was a terrifying power. Saint had always excelled in defense, but now, her conservative battle style had reached its culmination. After all, was there a better defense than denying the enemy their offensive ability? Sunny, for one, would not want to clash with someone like Saint while denied both his aspect and his attributes. Not that there was anyone like Saint out there, in either of the worlds. And on top of that, she now possessed the strength of a supreme creature. Her will was also exceptionally strong enough that she had been completely immune to most shapes of mind and soul attacks as a mere awakened. Sunny smiled. I think we will raise hell, the two of us. The last change was not written in the runes, rather, it was the lack of runes that had been there before that announced it. The counter of shadow fragments that used to be at the very end of the field of shimmering runes was gone. It was not replaced by a new one, either, it was simply not there anymore. Sunny was not sure what it meant, but it seemed like Saint, or any shadow, perhaps, would not be able to become sacred through usual means. That made sense, sadly. Apotheosis was not something one could achieve through quantity, after all. It was the quality that mattered. Throwing one last look at Saint, Sunny failed to suppress a smile and turned to Slayer. His smile grew a little strained. This one had grown quite a bit more powerful, as well. 2569 Demon Slayer Sunny often wondered what powers Orphne of the Nine had wielded. After all, her shadow was already one of the deadliest things he had ever faced without them. It was no coincidence that Sunny called her Slayer. Just how fearsome the original had been? Orphne was one of the two known beings in all of history who had managed to kill a demon, after all. The other one was Weaver, and she had killed Weaver. In fact, she had killed Weaver twice, so what did that make her? To his surprise, though, her aspect was not at all what he had expected. Sunny had thought that she would possess an immensely powerful combat aspect, or at least one focused on death and killing, but that was not the case at all. If anything, Slayer's powers were the antithesis of that. Her aspect was focused on utility, with hardly any combat applications. More than that, at its core, it was an aspect meant to promote understanding and harmony. At least that was the impression Sunny had gotten after Cassie transcribed the runes for him. Of course, the powers Slayer had reclaimed after remembering the name of the woman who had cast her were not entirely the same as Orphnie's aspect had been. After all, Orphnie had been a human. Slayer, however, was a shadow creature. Had been a shadow creature before Sunny killed her and made her his shadow, rather. It was a bit complicated. What it is ridiculous, not complicated. He smiled faintly. Orphnie of the Nine had been a mortal woman, and like all mortals, she had a shadow. Shadows traveled to the shadow realm after the death of mortals who cast them, but Orphnie had descended into the shadow realm alive, and died there side by side with the demon of fate. Her shadow remained in the shadow realm, but it did not surrender to the laws governing the afterlife and refused to be annihilated. Instead, it roamed the dark expanse of the realm of the dead for thousands of years, hunting down other shadows to sustain itself. Eventually, the feral shadow of Orphnie of the Nine became a shadow creature. A kind of being who were born from the shadows of the dead, but were distinctly different from them, like nightmare. That shadow creature was eventually killed by Sunny and turned into one of his shadows. And his shadows were all shadow creatures themselves, by definition, sort of. They were apparently incomplete, whatever that meant, and were neither mere shadows of the dead nor independent shadow creatures. Sunny winced as if in pain. Shadow God was truly a great and awesome god. But his naming sense was outright terrible. Perhaps that was one of the reasons Sunny had ended up receiving his blessing and becoming a shadow slave, as well. Wait. If Slayer is the shadow of a shadow creature of a shadow of a mortal woman, then what the hell was Sunny himself? He made a face, trying to define his own existence. It seemed that he was a mortal man who had become a shadow creature with the help of the nightmare spell and a blessing from Shadow God, then killed himself and became a shadow, then made himself into a shadow creature once again while attaining supremacy. Coincidentally, he had once descended into the shadow realm alive, too. Now, though no trace of his mortal self remained, he was truly and utterly a creature of shadows, born from the shadow of a dead man. Huh. In any case, as a shadow creature, Slayer did not wield a true aspect, and neither did she possess a true flaw. Rather, she wielded powers that were derived from the aspect of her original source, Orphnie of the Nine. The God Slayer. The Demon Slayer? Orphnie did not have a title because no one had been alive to tell the tale of her incredible and terrible deeds. She had performed them at the world's end. After all, in fact, it was her hand that had set the end of days in motion. Few beings could boast of causing the deaths of all the gods and all the demons with one strike of their blade, but Orphnie could. Which only made the fact that he aspect had nothing to do with death and combat so much more poignant. Slayer's first ability was quite an odd one. It allowed her to understand and communicate with all manner of beasts and living creatures, as well as comprehend human languages. Humans were beasts as well, after all. An ability like that certainly had its uses, and while Sunny had benefited greatly from having learned a few dead languages himself, how could he put it? He would not have wanted to receive an ability like that as a sleeper. The world was too violent and cruel a place for a power that only encompassed communication. It was an ability suited for peace, but life was war. Slayer's second ability greatly enhanced all her senses. That one was far more useful, and could explain how she was so eerily accurate when shooting a bow over vast distances, great and laying ambushes, and almost impossible to catch unaware. Her third ability was the only one that could be considered a direct combat one. It allowed her to imbue her attacks with soul essence, making them more potent. That one reminded Sunny of Samara and her powerful rifle, so he felt wistful while reading the runes. The method is similar, but the result should be different. I will have to watch Slayer fight to understand more. Samara's ability had been straightforward. It allowed her to charge objects with her essence and then convert that essence into kinetic or heat energy. Slayer's ability, however, was more mystical. So, he could not immediately understand its nuances. It was curious, though, that Slayer had not used that power before. She seemed to have retained some measure of her first two abilities as a feral shadow, but not of the other ones. Now that she had regained more of her former self, though, that was going to change. And then there was Slayer's fourth ability. That one intrigued Sunny the most. Slayer's fourth ability, which corresponded to Orphney's transcendent one, was simple at first sight. In fact, Sunny could have already guessed what it was, having seen it in the visions bestowed upon him by Ariel's game. It allowed her to take the shape of beasts she had seen, heard, smelled, touched, or whose flesh and blood she had tasted. She was a shapeshifter. Such a transformation ability was certainly versatile, and could be a powerful weapon when faced with a certain kind of enemy, but that was not what piqued Sunny's interest. Instead, it was the fact that Slayer was a being who had existed for thousands of years, and had therefore met and killed a great number of beasts, and the fact that the definition of beasts the runes described was quite vague. Their direct meaning was bestial things, which was not exactly precise. He had seen her take the shape of a hawk, as well as of a fearsome black leopard powerful enough to kill one of the sacred spirits of Heart God's forest. Who knew what other shapes she could assume? Could she turn into a nightmare creature? Most monsters fit the definition of a bestial thing despite not being beasts. Humans, meanwhile, were beasts, but not bestial things. Most humans weren't, at least. What about other kinds of creatures? Could Slayer take transcendent forms of human saints, as long as they were bestial? Could she take the shape of mythical beasts? For example, could Slayer turn into a dragon? Sunny gave her a long look. It was full of suspicion. I'd better keep her away from Kai, just in case. He shivered. And nightmare. One hellish horse is enough. Slayer ignored his pointed gaze, continuing to stare at Saint with her usual air of cold malice. Sunny smiled and leaned back. She had a fifth ability, as well, although it was unlike those of human supremes. Slayer was not a sovereign, after all, and neither was she a tyrant. So, she had no domain and did not rule over anyone. Her fifth ability was connected to the very essence of supremacy, instead to the will. Just like the supreme abilities of sovereigns, it seemed like the extension and culmination of her other powers. It allowed her to clearly sense and understand the will of other beings, as well as communicate her own better. She could imbue her weapons with her will in a direct manner, for example, making them that much more deadly. It's interesting. Slayer's powers, unlike her personality, were more subtle and understated rather than furious and ferocious. Despite the nature of her aspect, though, Orphney had been far more deadly than any other human Sunny knew of, and had achieved far more terrifying feats. An aspect was not complete without a person's attributes, though. It was Slayer's attributes that made her powers shine, one of them in particular. Sunny knew that Orphney of the Nine had possessed an attribute similar to his own, his former greatest benefactor and most awful foe, Fated. However, Slayer did not. Whether it was because Slayer was not the same being as the original Orphney or because she had already fulfilled her fate, he did not know. In any case, he was thinking of a different attribute, an attribute that seemed to explain the unique composition of her soul, the deadly purity of her battle technique, as well as why she had been able to persist in the shadow realm for thousands of years without being consumed by it. It was called pure soul. Orphney of the Nine had possessed a pure and unyielding soul that shone with beautiful light and refused to be blemished. That, perhaps, was the source of her tenacious resolve and single-minded determination, as well as why Slayer was always able to be true to herself, both in thought and in action. And that, in turn, was the reason she had been able to persist in her quest to slay the demon of fate until both of them perished, even as the world was coming undone around them. That was also the reason why her soul shone with pure light even after she became a shadow, and why she had been able to withstand the jaws of the shadow realm for thousands of years. That attribute had a more practical side to it, as well. After all, one of Slayer's powers allowed her to imbue her attacks with soul essence, and her soul essence was similarly pristine, and therefore far more potent. Her will was pure and sincere, too, and thus could be expressed more effectively. Who could have thought? The most accomplished killer in the world was also the most sincere person in the world. Sunny was not sure if that was deeply fitting or reflected poorly on what kind of world they all lived in. Regardless of that, he felt lucky that Slayer had not possessed these powers when they fought atop the shadow of condemnation. Feeling fortunate to have survived that encounter, he looked between Slayer and Saint with a thoughtful expression. Sunny was quite curious which of these two supreme shadows would win if they were to duel. His money was on Saint, probably, since her powers lent themselves better to direct combat. Slayer was a fearsome fighter, as well, but she excelled in subterfuge more than she did in direct confrontations. She was first and foremost a huntress, not a warrior. That said, he could not be sure. After all, Slayer could simply summon wings and fly high into the sky, then unleash a barrage of arrows at Saint from dozens of kilometers away. If Saint summoned her true darkness to blind her, she could continue to fight by relying on her other senses. Hell, she could probably shapeshift into a dark drifter, the eerie creature of darkness. Sunny and Slayer had fought in the Shadow Realm and be just as at home in the embrace of true darkness as Saint was. Well, that was before Saint raised her shield of nothing to negate Slayer's powers. Sunny was not sure who would win that fight, but he was certainly curious to see. I won't be seeing it today, though. After all, he was too busy to procure another citadel. And even if he did not know how the battle of two supreme shadows would end, he knew that it would definitely reduce the nameless temple to rubble. Some other time, then.